I am pleased to introduce Todd Murray with the WSU, Washington State University. Yeah, I didn't want to say the wrong one. So take it away, Todd.
Thank you. I'll show my screen and make sure that the Alexis, can you see the presentation or just me?
I can see the presentation and you, and I can hear you.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I swear this is the only Asian giant hornet that you're going to see in my presentation. My co-author on here is Dr. Chris Looney, who, as Carla mentioned, has been a key part of the team responding to Asian giant hornet, and he prepared a few slides that included these and assured him that other speakers were going to cover this, but thought I'd show the picture of the hornet wearing its Cascadia ski cap, getting comfortable, hopefully not too comfortable here in the Northwest. So my talk today is going to really pick up on what Alexis already kind of set the stage for and hammer home the importance of first detectors in the successful approach of managing exotic pests as we deal with them in the state. You know, again, Asian giant hornet is going to be a good success story that other speakers will talk about more in depth, but I wanted to go through and kind of give the fundamentals of why we do this. So first of all, what is a first detector and why are they important? You know, first detector really is a term that I'll cover a little bit later, you know, is basically just a term to describe an individual that rapidly detects and reports the presence of an invasive plant pathogen or an arthropod or a pig or whatever we deem as a priority species. You know, but why are first detectors important and what's the value? And so what I'll do is go through a few scenarios to try and drive this home, because there is a really strong reason why the Invasive Species Council wanted to come crash your weed party and teach you about first detectors and why we want you to know about some of the activities of the council. So to do that, let's go back to 1998 when we were living in a different type of innocence back then. And this is a great picture because this is a picture of a small neighborhood in Chicago, the Ravenswood neighborhood. And that's a picture of actually the apartment building that I lived in for a couple of years as I grew up in the area of Chicago and went to school down there. But I was in the Northwest by this time, but in 1998, a city worker was going through the street trees there that were predominantly maples throughout the street, removing limbs and cutting out dead wood as they went through there. So he cut up some good pieces of maple dead wood, gave them to a buddy of his, it's seen here in this picture, and loaded them up so he could use it as firewood at his home. This guy happened to have participated in a number of different training events that teach people about exotic pests and what exotic pests you need to watch out for. At this time, Asian longhorn beetle was already causing a significant problem there in New York and got quite a bit of media attention. So this guy put the logs in the back of his truck. As those logs sat there for the day, he started noticing these beetles chew their way out and emerge, and quickly recognized that beetle as something that was different and something that he was not familiar with, and quickly jumped online. And remember, this is back in 1998, so the use of web tools wasn't all that common yet. But he went online, looked up Asian longhorn beetle because he had learned about that beetle in one of his education series, much like this one, and saw it and said, yep, that sure looks like that beetle. Contacted the entomologist concerned about the beetle to get verification of the identification, and sure enough, it was Asian longhorn beetle. And that then prompted the removal of all the potential host trees within a radius of that initial epicenter in that area of Ravenswood in Chicago. And so essentially, you know, this beetle has a pretty wide host range. So it essentially removed all deciduous trees and many large deciduous shrubs throughout that neighborhood. And these trees are worth their weight in gold. If you've ever been in Chicago during the summer when it gets to be about 95 degrees and 100% humidity, shade is really, really important to have in those neighborhoods to help maintain air conditioning in the area. So this was a significant setback for that neighborhood. Also, we had to recruit a number of arborists to go through and pick through those trees and make sure that they could delineate what trees are potentially infested or not, and go ahead and remove those. So after quite a series of treatments and programs, and I believe this was over a 10-year period, they spent well over $100 million just in that one neighborhood to eradicate it. Consisted of removal and destruction of more than 1,700 mature trees, and then they treated another 92,000 trees with injectable systemic insecticide. So this was a really expensive effort, even though they feel like that they caught the population pretty early on to avoid establishment of the beetle. And ultimately, they were successful in this campaign to eradicate the beetle. But it came at a hefty price, and that neighborhood lost all its trees. So then flash forward a couple years to our neck of the woods in Tukwila in 2001. A nursery person here in Tukwila had some bonsai trees in quarantine following the proper protocol and understanding. That person also had participated in past educational events like WSU's pesticide education program, to where they learned about concerns like the Asian longhorn beetle and what was happening in Chicago. And while that tree was in quarantine, they noted a beetle chew its way out of one of the bases of the tree and then fly off into the subsequent area, and which quickly prompted them to contact WSDA, and Washington State Department of Agriculture could come in, and I believe this is a 5-year program, to where they went through and removed all host material surrounding that bonsai nursery, and cost less than $1 million. So I know this is the third time that you've seen this graph, but I hope that means that this is a really meaningful topic to understand in comparing these two similar species, one being Asian longhorn beetle in Chicago and the citrus longhorn beetle here in the Pacific Northwest. The timing of that initial detection not only guaranteed a better success rate of eradication, but also costed significantly less. So it's really important to understand that when we're looking to recruit first detector groups, we really want to get those groups to start looking at a quick response. The last thing I'd hate to hear is someone to say, a few years ago I saw an Asian longhorn giant Asian longhorn beetle and didn't think about reporting it. So we want to make sure that these are critical species that we want you to be aware of, and the earlier that we can report them, the more of a chance that we get to eradicate them, and the cheaper it'll cost us. So as far as invasive species go, it's not necessarily the not so bright outlook to the future. As our climates change, it causes many of our current plant material that's here in the Pacific Northwest to become more susceptible to pest attacks. We see this in our forests as we have drought-stressed trees, as our rainfall patterns switch to wetter winters and drier summers. That causes our trees to stress out, and we get sometimes disease outbreaks or beetle outbreaks. In fact, in this state, we had a range expansion of a native bark beetle called the California five-spined ips that worked its way up into Washington state for the first time that we've ever recorded. And that beetle took advantage of a lot of stressed out pine trees throughout the region of the Columbia River Gorge, but has reared its head all the way up to Moses Lake, Walla Walla area, and occurs up here all the way into the south part of Puget Sound now. So with changing climates, we're creating a whole bunch of susceptible host material that's going to be susceptible and easy targets for an invasive species. To add to that, changing climates, we're also going to shift the origins of different products that we get shipped here in the Pacific Northwest, as those ports ship out differently depending on what crops and what products do well coming out of those ports. So as we see small fruit industries or other types of fruit industries kind of shift to where we're importing from, we might see a whole new batch of invasive species from that new climate come into our ports. We're also seeing an increased number of species introduced. I can't emphasize this enough. As we go into living globally and enjoying the benefits of a global market, we're also going to see hitchhikers hitch a ride on anything that moves across in that market. And so the more we expand that global market and our global interaction, where we can travel all the way across the world in a very short amount of time, you can expect more hitchhikers to come back with us and on our products here in the Pacific Northwest. And that's just a fact. Our domestic import-export is only growing at a pretty steady rate, and we expect that rate to increase as we become more globalized in our economies. So we're just going to see more species introduced here in the Pacific Northwest. You know, and we're also going to see a relatively decreased regulatory support to help stop those species from entering the country. As things get more expensive and as parts of the government aren't fully supported to the degree that they need to be to adequately protect us, we're going to see that struggle of our regulatory agencies really having to put resources towards those key pests and helping keep those pests out. But I expect that support to also be under stress as resources are challenged. So that's kind of the not so bright outlook for invasive species that we have to deal with. New bugs here in the Pacific Northwest, just our state alone in Washington State Department of Agriculture has documented over 80 new pest insects, and you can throw a couple snails in there too, introductions since 1991. And that doesn't include all new insects that we've detected. These are just insect pests. And you can imagine that there's been similar amounts of increased detection rates of plant pathogens, weeds, and so forth entering the state also. So that's a lot of bugs to come our way in the last 50 years. Who finds all these new insects? This is an interesting study that the past chief entomologist for WSU, Eric Lagaza, and Chris Looney, as he onboarded into his position with WSU, we wanted to look at and see what is the actual amount of who's finding what in those state records of new insect pests. You know, we'd always have the conversation of, well, it's really important to invest in education programs because we think that first detectors are responsible for a lot of the new pests found in the state. So we really wanted to peel out that data and see if that was true. So what we did was we went through all those files and broke it up into 4 different categories, whether those insects were detected as the target of a pest survey, much like a gypsy moth is that Carla described. or were they detected as a non-target in a pest survey, like maybe a moth flew into a gypsy moth trap, and that's how we got the first state record. Or it was detected by a professional biologist outside of regulatory survey activities. We find a number of our agency biologists and other professionals in the area are really good at recognizing something that doesn't belong and brings it to WSDA's attention that way. Or whether it was detected by a private citizen who aren't biologists by trade or by training. And this is one that is a kind of a mishmash of your group. Many of you will fall into number 3 and number 4. And this is where we feel like this would reveal the power of education if you all are responsible for detecting pests in Washington State. And what we found was we got about 28% of those records detected through targeted surveys, and then another 20% from non-target surveys. The remainder were public and trained biologists that found those detections. So you add that up, and that's a significant number of just people who have a good general awareness of what target species we don't want in the state and what looks new to our state. This is essentially the time when we learned that we needed to listen to kind of the old geezers that we work with, and when they say, I've never seen anything that looks like this in my 80 years of working for Department of Ecology, this is something worthy. We need to start paying attention when we hear that from our colleagues that have been around for a while. So good job. This is where we see that educated population, stakeholder groups and user groups out there are good at detecting new species. So let's go through some of those significant ones. None of these are as media grabbing like Asian giant hornet or Asian longhorn beetle, but going back all the way to 1991, Joe Massett, who was Washington State Park Ranger and gardener there at Peace Arch Park. You're going to see a theme with a lot of these pests, much like Asian giant hornet, that a lot of these problems brew up with our Canadian partners also. Not going to comment on their regulatory ability to keep bugs out, but that seems to be a common process of we get a lot of their bugs. We also give them some of our bugs too. So it's a mutual relationship. But Joe Massett there was went to a class that Eric Lagaza was teaching about new pests that he's been seeing in Canada. One of those was this cherry bark chortrix. Joe learned about cherry bark chortrix at a pesticide education program that Eric was teaching at, and went back to Peace Arch Park, and sure enough was able to get the first U.S. record of this moth here and also in Washington State. Which also noted, it's important to note that same location was the first detection of one of our worst turf pests until recently, Tapula pallidosa, which is a European crane fly, was found on that spot 20 years earlier. So we got that recorded. We were able to implement an education program and a research program to learn how to manage this pest, but it now spread south into Oregon and is spreading naturally and maybe on some infested wood material. Not known to occur in the eastern counties of Washington State. So if any of you East Siders out there see it over there, give a yell. Next one is viburnum leaf beetle. It was brought into a WSU extension office in Whatcom County Master Gardener Clinic in 2004. We've been developing targeted education to gardeners and green industry personnel since 2001, which is where it first started popping up in British Columbia. So we expected it to come into Washington State, and now occurs south into Pierce County as far as we know, unless some of you log it on the app and report it. Another one that captured more media attention was the brown marmorated stink bug. It was first introduced into the US in 1996 in Pennsylvania, but we found it here in out in the Pacific Northwest in 2004. Since we founded in Oregon in 2004, we've been educating gardeners and landscapers and farmers about brown marmorated stink bug since then. And sure enough, we got our first state record in 2010 after we initiated a large size press release from WSDA and WSU, because 2009, 2010 was when this insect really started to outbreak in the East Coast and cause significant agricultural damage. So we know this is one that we need to keep a lookout for and monitor and get the word out. Next one was European chafer. It was first caught in a non-target trap in WSU in 2008, but was first recorded out in the wild by a submission to the WSU King Carter Extension Master Gardener Clinic in 2016. WSU and WSDA have been developing targeted education to gardeners in the green industry since about 2001, when we were initially worried about this pest, because again, this was one that was brewing up in Canada. Canadians aren't responsible for giving us this one, though. This one moved around in airplanes and commonly pops up in surveys around airports, but this is the first time we've seen it out in the wild, and now it's spreading all throughout King County, and now occurs south into Pierce County. So again, there's a reason to us wanting to come to the weed conference and engage your audience, because we know that you're at the front line of many of these pest detections. We have the proof, we have the data, and we know that this works. If we educate you about the pests that we're concerned, it's likely you are going to be the one to run across it and report it and give us the opportunity to respond quickly. So we know it works when we get the educational materials together and target those trainings and educational materials around recognizable pests. So pests like Asian giant hornet, which is very shocking and very large and pretty easy to ID. Same with spotted lanternfly. These are great insect pests to educate you about, because it doesn't take much diagnostic skill to understand that's what you're seeing. You know, a lot of other insects, you really need to dissect them under a scope to really understand that, whether you know it's an accurate identification or not. So we like to target those pests that are very distinctive and characteristic, like Justin walked through, and how we decide what are priority pests for the council. But those targeted efforts, we also target those efforts towards those user groups that are likely experience those pests, like recreationers, hunters, and fishermen, if it's something that is going to affect those user groups. And we have modes through WSU to do this, through our WSU Master Naturalist program and our forestry programs. We target gardeners, green industry, municipal land managers through our pesticide education program. And as you see, master gardeners have been a significant source for a location where we get first detection of a pest.
Hey, Todd, you've got 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Finally, farmers, foresters, and agricultural consultants through our annual crop-specific events that the council and WSU participate in, and many of our other partners, along with the WSU education program and the newly rolled out PNW Forest Health Watch. But we've been doing this for a while. It was since 2004, the National Plant Diagnostic Network was formed in response to terrorist attacks from 9/11 that formed the Department of Homeland Security. This freed up funds to help land grants participate in protecting our borders from pests that could potentially be part of a terrorist attack. So we were mobilized to participate and support the diagnostic network to rapidly diagnose and report pests. So we've been doing it for a while, since 2004. But it really wasn't until recently, under the leadership of the Washington State Invasive Species Council, with Justin and Ray steering the ship, is to look at all our agency efforts and all our institute efforts and bring it all under one umbrella to develop this network, the Washington Pest Watch, that Alexis covered briefly in her topic. But essentially, it got us all together to normalize our messaging, our resources, and be your one-stop shop to become a first detector. So I encourage you to go on to our Washington Pest Watch program website to learn about training opportunities, first detector resources like the handbook that Alexis mentioned, and some of those other resources. Also encourage you to sign up on our pesticide education program online. We have a bunch of canned talks that cover invasive species and first detector training materials. And then finally, there's a national program initially hosted by the National Plant Diagnostic Network, to where you can get more first detector training materials online. So, but what you can expect to learn at one of these events is really how to distinguish pests that we're really worried about with those that are native, and how to recognize the damage. So if you go through training, you're going to learn that Asian longhorn beetles are spotted and they're shiny all over. They're black with some white mottling, some blue pubescent legs and striped antenna, which looks a lot like our native insect, the banded alder borer, but its body is flat in color. So it looks like it's been spray painted by flat spray paint, while the Asian longhorn beetle is shiny. Our banded alder borer also has a spot in the thorax, and so you'll learn that that's a distinguishing factor to separate the two. You also learn about our native insect, the Oregon fur sawyer, that looks a lot like Asian longhorn beetle, but its body is rough and has mostly white, hairy scutellum right there in the middle of the wing casing. So you'll learn these nuances of the different distinguishing characteristics to help you identify and ultimately report these. You also get loaded up on first detector resources that you can also find on the Washington Pest Watch website. But finally, help us find these things. We know that you are the experts, and we know that you're the ones that are likely going to run across these critters first out in the field. So it's really important that you access the resources that the other speakers from the council and representatives of the council have covered, and get engaged with those resources and become a first detector. So with that, feel free to reach out to me on any of these resources. Also, we're happy to come to your places of work and organizations and give you personalized training about some of these pests, but don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, I think I made it right to the end with a time.
You did. That was perfect, Todd. Thank you so much.